Buongiorno a tutti, siamo qui ad Arf 2025 con Becky Cloonan, autrice di Somna, a cui faremo qualche domanda. So, first question is how did Somna come to life and what inspired the idea of bringing together two creators who both write and draw and are complete authors?
This is it's not a long story, but it started like almost 10 years ago. That Tula and I were friends from like so way back, and we'd be talking at cons, and I was like, oh, I've got this idea for a comic, but it was such like a kernel of an idea. It was just the very like. It was actually the end of the comic was the idea that I had. I was like, I want a comic and it's going to end like this. And she was like, oh, this sounds so cool. Like, I'd love to, like, if you want to work on it together. And like from that moment on, I was like, this is our comic. So every time we got together, we would talk about it. We'd like brainstorm ideas or be like, when should we start? And this and that. And she lives in England and I'm in America, so we would only see each other really like at conventions. But whenever we did, we were like, okay, let's talk about this book. And I think the subject matter made it hard to find a publisher because we didn't want to compromise on, it was adult. It wasn't like, it's not crazy, but it's a mature story. So, we really had to, we just bided our time. And so we found the right one with Distillery. And a lot of that too is timing. Like she's super busy and my schedule's always packed. So finding that moment where we both had an opening in our schedule, we found the exact publisher. It just seemed like everything happened all at once. And then it, 10 years of working on it together or thinking about it and brainstorming and dreaming. And then in 7 months, we finished the whole thing. And then we were like, what do we do now? It's over. I can't believe it. This thing that we talked about for so long, over in a minute. So,
For the next question, I'll go on Distillery. Because you worked with Marvel, DC, other publishers, and so my question is, what is the difference between Distillery and the other publishers in terms of editorial approach, vision, creative freedom?
I think I can. My distillery experience is very similar to my experience at Image Comics, where a lot of it is up to the team. So like when Tula and I drew the comic, we wrote it, we drew it. Then we had to hire a colorist ourselves and a letterer ourselves and an editor ourselves. So it's very much like the team are people that we brought together for the book. It's not a lot of times at Marvel and DC, and even sometimes like Dark Horse. Boom, you'll have, as a writer, you come to a book and then you get help. Like, the editors will help you find an artist, and the team is kind of put together through the publisher. But with Distillery, it's very much like we hand them the finished book basically, and they print it. It's very hands off in that kind of respect. Yeah, but they're so supportive of the book, and it was a great experience to do. The deadlines were a little a little rough, but that's every comic really.
So I will go back to Somna, which I loved, just to say. The question is, this comics explores the themes of witches and the repressed sexual desire. And in your personal view, in which forms, if it is present, this same repression, it's present in today's society?
Yeah, it's Somno is very much like first and foremost like historical fiction and like heavy on the fiction because it's obviously. But we did pull a lot from history. Like there's a sermon in the second part, I think, of the book, the second issue, that I basically looked up sermons from the time period, like Puritan sermons, and took like phrases and like a lot of inspiration from that. Like at the end, there's some marriage vows that are said, and those marriage vows are like very abridged versions of, but this is what people were actually saying when they got married back then. And it feels extreme because when you look at the history, it was extreme. It was like it has like cult kind of vibes, and you can definitely see that now. There's so many parallels to, the way people are marginalized people are just treated, and the fear mongering and the oppression of basic human rights. It's still very much prevalent today, as it was in the 1600s. When you go back, you can trace, like, that's the I love learning about history because there's so many through lines where you could say like, oh, like we haven't really changed that much. Like if we went back in time, things would be very different. But then there'd be so many similarities, and like we're all still people making very human mistakes, and we're susceptible to the same fear and just all the same horrible emotions that we've always had as humans. So that's it. I think it is Samna is like a very it can be read as a very modern story. And the funny thing is like we didn't really mean it that way, but it just happens to be that you can it, everything is all still relevant, which is kind of sad, but here we are.
I think that a lot of stories comes like that. And so I have a question linked to this question. There was a recent movie, Nosferatu, by Robert Eggers, which reminded me of Somna that came 1 year before, in the way they use the supernatural element to address both horror, sexual desire, and the question is, do you think that the horror can be an effective way to express eroticism, or how the horror is an effective way, an effective genre to express these themes?
Yes. I with Somna specifically, when we were first 10 years ago when we were thinking about it, we're like, we got to make it really sexy so that at the end of the book, because it's a horror book, people are like, why am I turned on by this? Like that's kind of the fear of like what makes it kind of scary. Like why do I like this thing? And it turned into something else. Obviously, when we were doing it, it became like we touched on I think more serious themes rather than just make a sexy horror book, which was that's what it all came out of. There's been a few really good. I mean, It Follows was another really good one that was like really, combine these two things like perfectly. Eggers definitely like with his Nosferatu. Yeah, I think they're. I mean, I don't know. They're two great tastes that taste great together. Like I love like horror so much. And making it a little sexy is like, why not? Why can't we have these things? It works. It really does. I sometimes it's like I try not to think too much about it because it's like I don't want to pick apart the magic. I just like it.
Wonderful. So, last question is a more general one because you've worked with Wonder Woman, Batgirls, and so a lot of female-driven stories, if we can call it like that. And so, what's your relationship or your approach in writing female characters in general?
It's the same that I do with like the male characters. There's not really too much difference because I mean, aside from the fact that like what they might go through as characters might be different than what the male characters go through, but yeah, for the most part, it's when you boil it down at the end of the day, you want to tell a story that will hit you in the feels really, and I want these characters to be relatable and have faults and go on a journey so that when you finish the book, they are in a different place than, where you started with them. So part of that is like figuring out like, who these characters are. And I really don't, I mean, it's like, I don't think of them as female characters really. I just think of them as characters. And that's, like when I was doing Punisher, it was like, I approached that the same way that I did with Batgirls, even though they're different characters.
I think it's a very modern approach.
It's hard because it's like, yeah, I don't know. I think you're maybe thinking too much about it if you approach them as like, well, I gotta write some girls now. Time to write the girls. Yeah, just wear the same hat, just put on your writer's hat and just write them like you would anyone else. And they're gonna come out, hopefully well-rounded and just as deep and full of dreams and hopes and fears and faults as all the male characters.
So we thank Becky Cloonan advice to our public to read Somna. So.